Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on when you may be watching this. I'm Jamie Moeller, and this is the Grad Connection, where my goal is to try to help graduate students and really anybody else who might stumble across these to try to help you do more than just survive. I want to see you thrive. So first, I want to say that it's been about 2 weeks since I did one of these videos. I decided to take a break and to go on vacation, which was the last video I talked about was, basically focusing on trying to unplug and disconnect and those kinds of things. Hopefully you found that worthwhile. So I'll hopefully begin from this point forward and continue on a weekly cycle again. I am recording from my office at work as things start to return to normal, so things might look a little different behind me, but I'm going to continue these as long as I feel like I continue to have something to say. So today, I guess today's topic, I really didn't know what I was going to talk about. As usual, I sit down and I kind of look through my book of ideas of topics and stuff, and I try to find something that really kind of stands out to me. And so, on this particular topic, I want to talk about resilience. I guess I'll probably put the byline, resilience, the will and resolve to never quit. Although I think it's more than just trying to endure, which I'll talk about. And I want to give 4 short stories if I can, and this one may go a little bit longer, which I think is fine. I'm always talking about the physical, the spiritual, the relational, and the professional, right? And so I want to give a story about resilience in each one of those things. And as I tell these stories, it's not to puff me up or to I want to talk about how resilience has played out in my life in these areas or in the lives of those close to me, and how I've observed it. And then I want to talk about, what I think makes us resilient and some ideas on that. So the first one is really practical right now. For about the last 8 months or so, I've been walking with my wife and I have been walking through a really hard situation with my daughter. And she's been incredibly resilient throughout this. And I've kind of observed, the emotional roller coaster that she's been on, and, trying to, and I've seen her actually, these kind of, I guess, these thoughts that I have about, how resilience works, at least in my mind. I've kind of seen them play out in her way, but that's kind of in a relational way. I've seen that. I've experienced and kind of had to, my wife and I both have had to be somewhat resilient. Nobody really ever tells you how to leave a church, like in the spiritual realm, right? And we've had some pretty odd situations in which, and we don't move church to church very often, but we've done it twice. And in both cases, it was not a pretty thing, I guess. And so nobody really tells you how you're supposed to leave a church when you feel like you're supposed to leave a church. And in both situations, I kind of felt like it was, don't let the door hit you on the way out kind of thing. And I don't know how else to describe it. But it takes resilience to, a lot of people when they leave a church or they get hurt by people in the church, oftentimes they throw their hands up and they say, well, there's no good in it. And the reality is there's no perfect church because there's no perfect people. I cannot look back and see when we left churches, the 2 churches that we've left, I can see how it would have hurt them. So I get where they're coming from. It may not justify the response. But nevertheless, it took resilience to actually plug back into another church. Because it's very easy just to give up and throw your hands up and say, it's not all worth it. There's nothing valuable there. We're just going to, avoid church, right? And I'm just telling you I'm not trying to proselytize or any of that. I'm just telling you where I'm coming from. So that's kind of resilience played out in the spiritual realm. In the professional realm, back around 2015, I was serving as an associate dean with a lot of responsibilities in a college here at Purdue. And because of situations and circumstances that I'm not going to dive into, I'll just say that I was basically asked to step down as associate dean, basically removed. I really didn't have a choice. And so I spent about 9 months in professional purgatory, just kind of mulling over the situation. And it was really a shock to me. And quite honestly, I basically taught my classes, and then I would go to my office and I would sit in my office and veg out. And it was really kind of a dark time for me. and it took a lot of effort because it was like having my identity stripped away. Whether that's a positive thing or a negative thing, I'm just saying, a lot of times I find that my identity is wrapped around what I do, not necessarily who I am per se. And you can judge whether that's healthy or not. I'm just telling you how it is. And so to lose a position, and I think a lot of, particularly men, but I think women can as well, when position is lost, you really start questioning your value. You go through a lot of emotional states, I think. But nevertheless, it took resilience to basically sit for 9 months and kind of wait for an opportunity to come, which led me to the graduate school where I am now at Purdue. And I forget how many years I've been here. As of October, I think it will be 7 years. So, but it took resilience to throw my hat back in the ring and get back up on the horse, if you will, and to do that. And then lastly, in the physical realm, I think a lot of people deal with the necessity of being resilient. What I wrote down here is kind of this something that my wife and I went through. She had a situation where she was having her ear was hurting and such, and she went to an ENT, ear, nose, and throat doctor, and had a MRI or whatever it is that they do. And the doctor basically said to her, well, there's nothing going on with your ear, but there's something else we need to talk about. And long story short, they had found a growth, and they were concerned that growth was cancerous, I think. And that's kind of where our minds immediately went. So she had to be resilient and just kind of stand in faith that things were going to work out. And long story short, she stood through that, and it was a very, I mean, I think it was a taxing time for her more than me, but me as well. And we really didn't tell anybody, but long story short, it came back as it was a benign situation. As long as it doesn't obstruct anything, she doesn't have to worry about it. So these are 4 areas in which, it's that I've seen resilience play out in my life in each of the 4 different areas of life. And so my question is, what makes us resilient? Now, I want to admit that a lot of this material comes from a couple different sources. There are several things from the Harvard Business Review, and I'll put them in the show notes. There's an article called Resilience is about how you recharge, not how you endure. There's another one that says what really makes us resilient, and there's another one that's called How Resilience Works. Again, I'll put links in the show notes for all 3 of those. And so I'm kind of distilling stuff from all those things, but also from my experience. The interesting thing that I think the one article, the How Resilience Works, or excuse me, what makes us resilient, that article is interesting. 2 things that I draw from it. Number one is that resilience has nothing to do with gender. So it's generally pretty equal as far as gender is concerned. And then also age really doesn't affect it either, as far as determining whether somebody's going to be resilient or not. And I like their definition of resilience. Resilience is a reactive state of mind created by exposure to suffering. And again, that's from the one article. What really makes us resilient is the name of the article. So first and foremost, it's kind of like, let's define what resilience is. To me, it's kind of this. It's when you experience something in your life that is generally causes suffering, usually has change involved. And it's not just, and I would go beyond, and I would go and say, here's another book that I'll point to. This book called Managing Transitions was incredibly important to me when I was going through my professional, basically in 2015, when I was removed as associate dean. This book became critical to me. And so it wasn't, using the concept from the book, it really wasn't just about change, it was about transition. And really all 4 of these areas that I've talked about, there was change going on. There was something that we were dealing with, we were having to address, and it required resilience. But, there's a difference between, and this is something that the book draws out, is there's a difference between change, which is just a shift that really doesn't affect you psychologically, it doesn't affect you mentally, you just pivot, versus a transition, which functions on you at a much deeper level. If you've never read the book by William Bridges, I would encourage you. Another takeaway from it, I think, that's pretty important that I kind of jotted down, and it's one of the things that stuck in my mind, is that through any transition, you go through a period of where there's an end point, there's what Bridges calls a neutral zone, and then there's a restart or a new beginning. And oftentimes, one of the things that we try to do is we try to rush that neutral zone experience because we're in limbo. We're reminded of what used to be, and we don't know what's coming. In other words, what the new normal is going to be. And you could say to some degree, I mean, I think a lot of us are dealing with that right now in the COVID environment. And as we get back to work and we try to get or resume our lives back to whatever the new normal is. But nevertheless, so those are some initial thoughts. And I jotted down, I think, 5 things that I think are important relative to resilience. Again, these are distillations from these various sources. But nevertheless, I think they're things that I've seen play out. First and foremost is facing the facts of the reality. If you're a leader, and this is one of the articles talks about this, if you're a leader and you need to present, a threat with the hopes that people would be resilient, you don't need to sugarcoat it. You need to just straight up tell them the truth and just be forthright with it. So facing the facts or the reality. And I'm reminded, where is it? There's a quote that I have on my wall from Garrett J. White that says, "Face the reality of the facts, whatever they may be, and live." Right. And so facing the facts is number one. To be resilient, first, you just have to come to terms with what is and just address it. Second, don't rush the neutral zone. And that kind of comes from the Bridges material, but don't rush that neutral zone experience. It's whether it's in relationships or whether it's professionally or whether it's, in a spiritual, like church environment or whatever it is. Oftentimes when one thing ends, we want to immediately jump to something else. And I realize professionally you may have to do that. But if you can, taking that transition time and dealing with and going through the stages of grief that occur. Because I think in all of these situations, when there is a transition, when there is a change, you can't rush that. So next would be recovery requires recharging, refocusing to be able to restart. Let me say that again. Recovery requires recharging and refocusing to be able to restart or to begin again, if you will. And so, again, this kind of highlights the need for the neutral zone and for you to step back and take a breath and refocus and recharge. Because if you just run from one situation, run from the ending straight to a new beginning, oftentimes you'll jump from a situation that might have been bad into something that is even worse. Number 3, and I think, or number 3, this is number 4. Because I wrote it down 4 and then I added a 0 because I had one other point that I wanted to make, which is that very first one. But and this is a point that comes from a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is, I think, Viktor Frankl is the author. Was in the concentration camp during World War II. And one of the key takeaways from that book, and it's basically a book that talks about to some degrees talks about his experience, but also talks about, kind of what was going on in his mind and how he kind of made it through that situation. But I think the big takeaway from that book is in the midst of whatever's going on that you're dealing with, that you need to be resilient in, is creating meaning from the experience. And trying to learn from what's going on around you and try to take that into heart and find meaning in the middle of the neutral zone. Find meaning in the middle of the transition. Find meaning within the middle of whatever is happening that's negative. Trying to make our reactive state of mind be creating meaning while we're being exposed to suffering. So that's number 4. And then the last one is, do whatever's next. Do whatever's at hand. Do what you can do at that moment. I mentioned, the situation when I, professionally, when I lost the associate dean's board, I was basically removed from the associate dean position that I served in for 4 years. Initially I simply sat in, I'd go teach my courses and I'd sit in my office. And after about 3 months, then I started doing those things that seemed obvious. The things at hand to do. And so for a faculty, that's just keeping up with your teaching and doing a good job there, doing the committee work, working with graduate students and helping them progress. I mean, doing the things you know to do rather than just focusing on the loss or whatever you're letting go of. Focus on the meaning that you can make and focus on the things you can do at that point in time in the middle of that transition. Because what it does is, and if you can, and I would even add, if you can, find ways to make deposits and make impacts on other people's lives in a positive way. Because I think that helps pull us out of, any funk we may be in or any challenges we may be in. and that kind of thing. So hopefully you found this useful. It's oftentimes I kind of decide what I'm going to talk about on the Grad Connection based on what's going on in my life and try to make it practical. Hopefully there's some stuff that's useful here. Again, and one of the most important things I'd say is if you're not a subscriber to the Harvard Business Review, and I get nothing from saying this, I think there is a tremendous amount of material that's on there that's very helpful to working professionals. So if your university doesn't provide it, or if you don't have some other way to get it, I would encourage you to do that. So again, I'm Jamie Moeller. This is the Grad Connection. I'm encouraged by folks that have reached out to me and reconnected or let me know that some of this material is helpful to them, and that's really I really hope that it's something that you can integrate into your life and it makes a positive impact. I would encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, connect to me on LinkedIn if you're not already. Connect on Facebook. If you're a graduate student, particularly, connect on the private Facebook group called the Grad Connection. Be glad to see you there. Now, those of you who are maybe on that channel right now, I know I've been somewhat quiet, but it is the summer period, and so that's kind of often what happens in academia. Things get a little quiet in the summer, but we'll be ramping up shortly. So with that, I hope you have a great day. I hope you find this content useful. Bye-bye.